Welcome. Thank you both very much.
Yeah, but we're on Bunurong country under the Wominjeka welcome auspices of Ani Gail Kunawara Dawson, and just doing our work here for a little while. Yeah.
So we acknowledge country. Yeah. So the protocols are that traditional owners will conduct a welcome to country, and those who aren't traditional owners will acknowledge the country that they're on.
And I think this is the beauty of this kind of Zoom world, that we have to acknowledge that First Nation people are all over the world holding and being custodians for millennia or more than millennia, and we need to acknowledge that from all over the world.
So look, welcome. This is the Optimist Heart at the Centre for Optimism, and my friend Caroline Ward, it was an inspired vision to create the Optimist Heart, and people join us from all around the world every week. Some of you on Zoom, some of you on Facebook, and of course some of you watch on demand, and I find it just utterly inspiring. And Tyson and Megan, so great to welcome you here. Now, I think you both know that the first question we always ask at the Centre for Optimism is what makes you optimistic? But I'm going to nuance it a little bit today, because Caroline has now answered the question 7 times, I think, and each time she becomes more inspiring. But Caroline, my question to you is, through the Optimist Heart, what have you learnt about your own optimism?
About my own optimism. I think that the fundamental that I've learned is I've always depended, well, always in recent decades, that I need to generate my own optimism, that it's an inside out thing. But in the Optimist Heart, what I've discovered is that we can also weave together something that creates a very beautiful, uplifting fabric, which is in the optimism kind of platform, if you like. So it's not just me, it's us, which I think speaks to your we, us, you know, we're not alone. And that's really beautiful.
And you recall Rob Malik, who was your guest 3 weeks ago, Rob said, optimism is a state of mind, not a state of the world. Now, Tyson, last time we caught up, First, you opened with this fantastic humour. You've asked the wrong man. And then halfway through, you said, gosh, you guys at the Centre for Optimism, you've got something that's beyond words, your optimism. And you've inspired us on a whole new project with Peter Spence and Paul Cooper on Optimism 2.0. But for those who haven't heard you on this, Tyson, may I be bold enough to ask you, what makes you optimistic?
Well, I mean, I guess in our way, with all knowledge, we defer to the people who speak for that knowledge, and for the people who have expertise in that knowledge. You know, like it's not like Twitter where everybody's got an opinion on every topic. And for me, being one of those strange mutants who doesn't see glass half full or glass half empty, but just wants to know what's in the glass, I defer to people who are better than me and more knowledgeable about optimism.
Well,
so therefore, that makes me optimistic, just that way of doing it. So in our house, I defer all matters of optimism to my beautiful spouse.
Beautiful. As you know, your provocative questions inspired us the more. So for that, I'm deeply grateful. So Megan, may I ask you, what makes you optimistic?
Well, it kind of almost sounds as though we've conspired to kind of create a unified answer here, but we didn't tell each other our answers to this. And it's just interesting that Tyson's talking about, deferring to others who have more knowledge. Well, I was thinking that, the thing that inspires me is that there's always more to know, and that there are always others who know more than me. And it just really resonates with what Tyson's saying. Yeah, I just think it's just, yeah, I think it's just good to know that there's going to be a lifelong journey of learning.
And I love the beautiful sound of children. So many people, when we ask the question, what makes you optimistic? It's that sound of children and looking through the eyes of children. But this is the optimist heart rather than Victor Purton's interrogation on what makes people optimistic. So Caroline, may I throw to you to lead the conversation with Tyson and Megan in the optimist heart.
Thanks very much, Vic. That's very kind of you. So really, I just want to say from my heart, a huge thank you to both Tyson, to you for saying yes, and for saying, I want Megan to come with me. And because I think and then Megan and I were chatting on LinkedIn, and it's just beautiful. And I think, you said, yeah, but we could have, the kids screaming in the background, and go, but like, we've tried to sanitize life so much that we can't even open our hearts or our spaces to be inclusive to something that's not so sanitized. So I'm so happy that we're all here, however it will be. And when we spoke and said, well, will there be a guideline? Your book, I can't read it in one go. It calls me to just stop and highlight things and sit with it. I can't run over the top. And I keep going back and going, oh yes, and getting more insight. But one of the things, I don't have a plan for this morning. It's a conversation. I loved when I, was reviewing and I got to the idea of yarning, where we just, let's see where we go. There's stuff to be discovered, and even the words. I think that's the big challenge with what I read in your book here, Tyson, or Megan, what I'm reading here is that, and Tyson said, the words are limited. As soon as I put them down, I go, they're not enough. And I think that's our big challenge in the world today. And I guess what I'd like to say to people who are here in this space for the first time, we do get to explore really fascinating content, but more than the content, it's the way that we explore and that we allow something to emerge by the very act of showing up, all of us who are here, not just, those of us who are on screen, but those who are holding, the listening, because perhaps the listening is even more important. So on that note, the declaration is, I'm here as a curious person, knowing I don't know a lot, and I love to find out. So, Megan, you're from Central Queensland originally?
Yeah, so I'm Baradha and Yunkaporta. They're neighbouring, tribal areas in Central Queensland, kind of inland from Rockhampton and southwest of Mackay.
And did you grow up there until what age?
I was born in Mackay, and we moved to Victoria when I was 10 years old. So my dad was born in Mansfield in Victoria, and his family was still in still are in Mansfield in Victoria, and he's a builder, so there wasn't really any work happening in Queensland for a long time, and he'd been away from home for a long time, and Mum and Dad had young children, so I was 10, my older sister was 11, and we had, I think, sort of 4 and 5, or 5 and 6. I'm just trying to think of the age gaps. But my younger sister is 5 years younger than me, and my younger brother is 6 years younger. And him being away for a really long time meant that, his relationship with them was starting to become just distant. And so they decided, let's go where the work is. And we all moved down to Victoria and, moved to Mansfield. And Dad was working on Mount Buller. And so, yeah, we've become Victorians.
And do you go back? Do you get to go back to Central Queensland?
I haven't been back to Queensland. So the last time I was in Queensland, I'm just trying to think of the year now. So I went back with Eden for NAIDOC in in Rockhampton, but I just can't think of what year it was. Eden would have been about probably 6 or 7, and she's 14 now. That's my 14-year-old daughter.
Yeah.
So that was the last time I went back to Queensland, and yeah, it's I would definitely be back there a lot more. But thankfully for Facebook, I'm able to have that sort of digital kind of presence. So following along with photographs and things like that. But yeah, getting back to country is a big goal.
Yeah. And look, I guess I don't understand that, because it's not something that I have had. And I think when I was reflecting on it, I thought, I've had a restlessness in me for a really long time, and I remember I ended up in Chile, living in Chile for 13 years. I had an emergency operation there, and in recovery, I was lying in bed for about a month. And I was it was great. I was just being, I was like chilled. And then in the quiet of not being able to move, I started to feel and hear this kind of restlessness going, this isn't it. It's nice, but this isn't it. Where we got to go next? And I wondered if at times it's like that. I'm trying to find, where I'm from. Tyson, I was reading about, the four different aspects or kind of parts of the spirit, and that one is of the sky, the big self. The other is from the land. And if you've disconnected from that, that must be, I'm thinking there's something in that, And then there's the, the shadow spirit. I thought that was really interesting. It's there. You're going to keep it in check. Otherwise, it's the crazy Machiavellian narcissistic ego that sort of shows up. And this other one, which is the living spirit, that is the life. I took it like the life force moving through you. But if the land itself is not well, then you can't be well. And I thought, I know these are maps, but I'm, trying to get through to that. So can you take us a little more into exploring this world of how we show up and what are how we're well held and what changes?
It's very tricky, isn't it? And often the sort of tinkered, complicated systems of politics and identity and all those kind of things don't quite match up with our sort of quantum and non-quantum reality as beings in this place. And I've struggled with that a lot. So years ago, I was in Western Australia with Dr. Noel Nannup. He's an elder, Noongar elder from over that way. And we were in a place called Naunup. And he was talking about the big Malleefowl spirit in that place that's born into every person, and that's born in that place. And I said, I only know one person who was born here, but they're a settler, and I said that kind of dismissively, and he's like, hold up there. Let's have a look at that. I don't know your friend's name or who he is, but I bet I can describe him to you. And I went, oh yeah, go on. And he went on to describe this, this serene, gentle person with the soft, breathy voice, and all these behaviors, this constellation of behaviors. And I just went, oh, that's him. That's Jason. That's exactly it. And I'm like, so what's your point? And he said, well, he was born here. you know, so his spirit comes from here. It came out of this place. And I was just like, oh, and I just had to wrestle with that for like nearly a couple of years. Like just to have my, you know, my politics align with the realities of spirit, and then put the implications for that and trying to find my way through that. And I guess over that, it's been almost a decade since that happened. And I've arrived at the conclusion that, you know, we really need to bring every non-Indigenous person back into the law of the land. And if we don't, then everything and everyone's going to die. But this is hard because it means letting go of a lot of things. It means letting go of your special status as somebody who has a special connection to country that nobody else can possibly understand. Yeah. And I guess the thing is, you can't understand it up here. It doesn't mean you've lost that connection and you aren't that. It's just you can't understand it from here. It's got to be from here and, you know, out through all your relations. In that bigger mind, that's where you've got to understand it. So Megan and I, we've been talking to a lot of Silicon Valley type people, like leaders in, you know, artificial intelligence and stuff like that lately. And it's really interesting because they all have in common that they're doing a lot of chemically assisted sort of spirit walking, if you like. So they're doing all these DMT trips and they're going to this other reality. And pretty much all of the internet and all the tech you see is about trying to reflect the things that they've seen there. And all of their hopes and dreams for all the affordances of the tech are all grounded in that other place. And, you know, like they really would like to upload consciousness into a kind of a simulacrum of that world. And I keep trying to tell them to pay attention to their tether when they're on those trips, that, you know, they're looking around in this strange place, and talking to all these weird beings that they describe in very problematic ways. And I keep asking them to pay attention to their tether and what it's made of, and to follow the tether that's holding them there, because where that tether reaches, you know, as they're floating around in this cyberspace or this weird shadow world, if they follow the tether back, they'll find it's in a location, you know, and that's where you can't have anything, you can't think, you can't be, you can't have consciousness without that place. So it's there. And I guess if they find that, if you find the place, then you find who and what you are, and recover that. Yeah, it's really tricky. Megan's got more thoughts on that, in the way she's sort of looking at location as just absolutely central to not only cognition, but sort of everything. You know, in her PhD, looking at all this, how we come into how these realities are mapped, you know, and in our interactions with the digital space, how do we make sure that we are located? Because being located is the center of all things. She could describe it better than I could, though.
I don't want to sort of, I just noticed that a couple of people were talking about having some audio issues, and I just wanted to just check that we're coming through okay, that our sound is coming through clear. It
has to be upright.
Perfectly. Okay, thank you.
No problem with the audio, just some people. One person's on Facebook, someone's in Denver, so there's probably a lot of traffic in America at the moment, so don't worry, the sound is perfect.
Okay, fantastic, thank you. We've got this fantastic new mic, so yeah.
Traffic and termites, complexity, that's...
Yeah, well, so I'm looking at, Caroline and I were talking yesterday that about my research. So I'm looking at blockchain technology, and looking at it from an Indigenous governance perspective. So the governance of blockchain and the relationship or the impact that it will have on, or that it might have on Indigenous governance. And, you know, such kind of bizarrely, apparently unrelated worlds was really difficult for me to get my head around. And our little boy has this habit of pulling all the books off our bookshelf, which I kind of hated until he pulled this, you know, the perfect book that was perfect for my research off the shelf. But now I've gone back to hating him pulling the books off the shelf. So I'll just wait for him to pull the next gem that's related to my work. And it's this book about maps and how maps are, it's actually called Maps of Territories. And it...
territories.
Maps are territories. Yeah, and there's a discussion in there about, you know, how you know, ancient or, you know, I'm trying to think of the word. Let's just go with the word ancient. Humans kind of, you know, we went on journeys, wayfinding journeys, and in order to, you know, sort of describe to our peers and our, you know, our kin where they might go and find food, for example, we needed to be able to communicate that in symbols.
Yep.
Because you can't, you know, you can't sort of show them, unless you take them with you, you have to represent it.
Yeah.
And so, so, you know, a system of signs and symbols was, you know, developed in order to represent space, essentially. So, you know, and you can imagine, you know, I'm sure that all your imaginations are probably, you know, kind of constructing your own symbols right now that might represent, you know, your knowledge of places that you know. And if you were to describe a journey from where you're sitting now to, I don't know, the supermarket or I don't know, there might be some park where, you know, birds might flock. And so you've got to describe to your, you know, to the people who you know how to get there. And so, so it's believed that you know, that was kind of the beginning of language. And also that that those systems were ontologically sort of you know, based.
Mm-hmm.
So you know, different worldviews then formed different languages. And you know, I'm not a linguist, so I'm not you know, I know that there are you know, theories that are that have been debated that sort of, you know, talk about, well, does language actually really kind of represent your, or form your worldview, or is it, you know, vice versa? But, you know, just going on the sort of ideas that are in this book, it just really kind of just made me just deeply aware of how, you know, being a mother and knowing how babies go through these stages. You know, I read that, you know, a baby, it's really important for a baby's cognition that they crawl, because they, you know, they make their little way around their familiar sort of place, and they develop their spatial awareness. And so this spatial awareness is really fundamental for our cognition. So because we are making relationships of things in space and our relationship to those things in space.
Yeah.
So we're all doing it, and we've all been doing it since time immemorial. We all have a relationship with place and all the things in that place. And so over time, you know, you know, and particularly when you're thinking about Indigenous knowledge systems, we get an understanding of what's in that place and what are the rhythms of the things in that place and what's related to, like, so, oh, okay, so that thing flowers, and that's when those insects appear. And then the birds come for those insects, and, and then there's all these relationships that sort of, there's all these, kind of flows and lines of relationships that happen within a particular place. And this, Caroline, this in your place. This, and we all know this, and we kind of think about, we've got to get back to our place. And I think, we are actually in many places, I think, certainly in this time in the world. Yeah. And I mean, I've kind of had this diasporic sort of experience myself, we were talking earlier, I've come from, North Queensland, and then moved to Mansfield, and then my parents moved to, to another town like located nearby, and they're still there. And then I moved to Melbourne, and then I moved back up to Queensland, when I was, and so like people would ask me, oh, so where are you from? I'm so like, I don't really have a from, in a way, I don't really have a from yet. Or maybe not yet, but then this, this connection that I've had with my extended family on Facebook, through that connection, there was a photograph that was placed on there of my mum's auntie standing next to a scar tree. And a scar tree is a tree where the bark has been removed at some point in history to make a canoe. And then the bark heals over time, creating, you can see the outline of this scar in the tree. And sometimes they're carved, and, there are intricate sort of designs placed on the wood. But she was standing next to this tree on my mother's country. And through that image, I was immediately transported back in time to, I could just see, I felt this connection, this ancestral connection to this place, and knew somehow within my DNA that I was made of this place. Mm. And that over the generation upon generation upon generation of ancestors who, literally were made of that place by the food that was in that place, and the dust that was in the soil in that place, and, and everything, all the knowledge of that place became part of my DNA. And I knew it in that moment. Mm. And so even though I've never walked that country, I feel it was amazing for me to have that moment. And that was sort of, that the same sort of thing happened again later in life, because my mother's, so my great-grandfather, so my mum's father's, I think it was his father, he was removed from his family, so part of the stolen generations. And we didn't really know where he was from. And then recently we found out where he was from. And that was an incredible moment for me, like in my identity, even though I still don't quite know where he's from. Just having a bit of an idea of that, and generally, oh, so I think he's from there. Well, I know he's from, because it's documented. Yeah. I just don't know what tribe he's from, and that kind of,
captured up in your Pomprow. Yeah.
And the town is actually the next town down the coast from where Tyson's family are. Mm. So it's this incredible sort of, coincidence. Mm. But yeah, just that these things that have happened to me along my journey that have kind of made me realise, as much as, you are in and of the place that you are in, you still are, there is still something, and it's, and I appreciate really that calling, that, or that sense that you had in yourself, Caroline, of thinking, where do I come from? Because I think it is there in all of us.
And there's all these maps, they're all interrelated, interconnected. And, you know, you have your own individual map that's unique to your point of view, you know, and it's the aggregate of all those that sort of form the fabric of your reality, you know, because we're in a quantum that we can't really perceive, and we kind of just have to share that perception with each other. So when you see meaning making and reality start to break down, when those relations aren't being made between us and tethered back to place properly, then nobody knows what's real in the world. And I think that could be a really apt description of where we are right now as a species, you know. So, you know, you've got all these maps, and they're out of this time and place sort of construct that was, you know, belonged to a brief era that we're transitioning out of now, and we're having trouble making sense of things. So, you know, coming back to that tether is the way to go, I think, because it's everything. You know, you've got a lot of ancestors behind you. So our son, Megan, was talking about, you know, his name's Diver, and so he's named after that that ancestor, that Diver Mitchell. And he was called Diver Mitchell because, you know, he only had a what they call a bush name. So he didn't have a Christian name when they captured him when he was a kid. And they named him Diver Mitchell because he was trying to escape from the police by diving into the Mitchell River. So they called him Diver Mitchell, you know, and he never escaped. And so he spent his entire life in that sort of custody. But we like to feel like, you know, our son, we named him Diver because there's that sense that, well, he's escaped, you know, he's going forward.
But he also has the two other names, right? So he's also has Juma is his third name, I think.
Yeah.
Second name, I can't remember.
Sion.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
And that's weaving, right? So you're weaving between worlds.
Well, Sion is it's the like the rootstock. It's so if you
grafting.
Yeah, like when you're grafting, you know, like viticulture, for example, if you want to create a strong sort of robust plant, you have to make sure that the it's not the rootstock, it's called the scion, that the thing that the new branch is being grafted onto. So it has to be strong, and it has to be grafted onto strong rootstock. So it was this idea about Diver was
here and now
coming from good stock, essentially, and leading to strong branches.
This came right through, you know, in his birth. You know, it's kind of determined his name. You know, there were all these entities coming through.
Yeah.
And, you know, so Megan's in the hospital in labor, and she's like, "Get your hands off me. 60,000 years, you don't know, get back." And and then she kind of went into this sort of time, a different time. Like she just wasn't even there. Her conscious being was in another place from everyone else in that room. And, you know, she was reaching right back and right forward, you know, and she was talking to everybody from past and present and future, like right the way through, you know, and and there were things happening there that, you know, it made it really clear that that's what this little boy was all about.
This was all assisted by, you know, a healthy constant dose of nitrous oxide too.
Yeah.
Speaking of, you know, chemically assisted places and journeys.
But it's interesting because I'm sure in the list of people who are here with us, and we have this really wonderful community who shows up and is here each Sunday for a kind of stretching out of the membrane of what we think we know. And so when we listen to the words, and for me, the things you're saying are not unusual for me to hear or even experience at times, coming from different tradition. But I'm sure for some people, it's really like, don't have a reference point for some of the things that you're actually referring to, you know, that you've gone to some other place and you're communing with people, you know, voices of the past and the future, and it's, you know, giving notice of what this being has come for. It's like, I think that's wild, wonderful, and normal. I would guess when we're connected in the worlds between. So that I love one of the symbols, your sand talk symbols, that shows, you know, the connectedness between the unseen and the seen, the world of form and of before form. And so it's a dance between, but we're so, I want to kind of put this, because what you're talking about, tethering and maps and places and our connectedness to land. And I'm going to meander a little bit here, and people get frustrated with me because they want to hear you, but I'm in the conversation.
Oh yeah.
There's, oh, now I lost myself, but I remember I was working as an agent. There was one guy who I was representing, and this is going back over 20 years, 30 years, let's say. And I thought he was a bit of a dullard, to be honest. Lovely, but he would come in, wander in, and he would just sit. And then I'd say, "What you been up to?" And he said, "Oh, I've been watching the ants in the garden for a couple of hours this morning." And I thought, bloody hell, you know, like, you get a life. And only now, you know, in my later years, I go, he was doing life. He was present to the ecosystem of holding that was speaking something at many, many levels in him that I was totally disconnected from. And if I look back at my life in those times, I wouldn't have been able to say that, but I was very much disconnected from myself, from, you know, and living probably in just this sort of fourth aspect of self, you know, really lost, untethered on every level. But this idea that in the world today, we're so fixated with everything that's through the senses. That's all there is. That you can see, touch, feel, taste, hear, and smell. There isn't anything beyond. And yet we don't even live well in the world of matter. We're not tethered, we're not connected, that we're not, and I say we as a kind of general unwell of humanity, not a sense of being connected to something bigger and more mystical and ancient, as well as something deeper. So my question it's not a question, you can respond, but I in your work that you're exploring, Megan, and everything that I kind of read, hear, and sense, the patterns of the universe, the laws of the universe, are they not more powerful than our asleepness, our disconnected? Are they not pulling us back? Even the blockchain is like a reordering from this hierarchical, dysfunctional power into a shared kind of system of co-created trust. So is it not driving us, calling back to...
Well, there's, that is recoverable. And there is a feeling that globally, in a bit of a zeitgeist, about a feeling of a longing for a return to those things. But first, there's a lot in that question, and we can go for hours. But first, we should just address that base, that, you know, just the foundation of that, and that idea of, you know, what you're kind of describing as a disconnection. And really, that's just a result of all these little gating functions.
And gating functions?
Gating functions, you know, gatekeepers and all that. There are gating functions, you know, in your community that give you a fear response. And I think when you first started talking, and then you felt like you had to apologize to everybody, you know, to preempt, you know, Yeah, please don't punish me for, you know, trying to feel for a minute. And then you forgot what you were going to say, you know. So there is a gating mechanism in there that prevents you from that other knowing, that sort of feeling, thinking way, you know. And there is that threat, and mostly we do it through ridicule. That's the way we police it, laterally, you know. So you mentioned with that fellow who was looking at the ants, you know, it's you have a programmed response that you're supposed to say, and you have a selection of different phrases that you can use to make him feel like an idiot and pull him back into line and make sure he's back into his executive function, you know. Get a life, I think was the phrase. Yeah, you used it, and that's yeah, get a life. There's a series of phrases we utter, and if anybody is thinking of trying to re-examine it out of a sense of, hang on, I think we've been told a wrong story about our human past. I think there's more to it than, you know, ooga booga, smack them on the head. You know, maybe, what's that data set? Where did they get that idea from that they can assert that before agriculture, 30% of humans died from homicides? Well, did they look at the church records of Neanderthals or something? Like, how did they get that figure? You know, people start to suspect that there's something wrong with that. And so they start seeking back. And so what's your first sentence that comes up in your gating function sort of programming is like, we can't go back. We can't go back. We can't go backwards. We have to keep going forwards. It's like policing everybody to be on this arrow of time and to conform to this myth of progress and advancement, you know. And so that's a lot of the people that we're talking to are really firmly grounded in transhumanism. This idea of moving from Homo sapiens to Homo Deus, you know, where we become godlike. Yeah. So anyway, that's just addressing that first bit. Yeah. And yeah, I think we'll come to the other parts of the question now. You got thoughts?
I think I've forgotten probably a lot of what the question was, but I think, I don't know, I mean, just on the concept of, you know, sort of observing the ants, and being disconnected. I don't know. We're so busy, aren't we? You know, and I feel a little bit like, I mean, certainly throughout COVID, or throughout the, you know, in Melbourne, for those of you who, you know, I'm sure most people across the world know that Melbourne has been locked down. The way that we were able to communicate with people, because we had a 5-kilometre radius, was through, you know, through Zoom and through online, you know, means. And so I kind of found myself being either completely and utterly bombarded, to the point where even my my eyesight has deteriorated really rapidly since the lockdown started. And I just kind of was feeling as though, like, it sort of really heightened my sense of how there's this, you know, you talk about the arrow of time and progress and stuff. It's like it's on hyperdrive when you're in this sort of world. And there's so much information that I have to try and stay on top of. And then the alternative is something like, stop, go outside, observe the ants. And I think that I certainly know which one I would prefer, you know, and I know which one resonates so much better with humanity. Yeah, it's, I don't know, it's really interesting, I think, that we have this narrative that bigger, faster, you know, better, or, you know, that those things equal better. But I think that this is an illusion that we've really got to, or it's a narrative that we've really got to sort of all collectively I think we really all need to stop and kind of ask ourselves, well, not just, okay, is this right? But what are we going to do about changing the narrative, perhaps? I don't know. I just feel a little bit like we need to sort of, I feel as though there's a bit of a collective responsibility to sort of say, we have to take stock of where we're going and, you know, and look at what's happening and think about, you know, I mean, it's, you know, I don't want to start using words like find solutions, but, you know, I don't know. I just feel like we do need to start thinking a bit more creatively about, yeah, like Tyson says, you know, like wrong story, these stories that we have that, primitivism is altogether bad. And I'm not saying, you know, we need to, you know, we can't go back, but yeah, I don't know. I'm the one who's rambling.
We've got just a wrong story of the past, you know, that Hobbesian nightmare that we're supposed to be all descended from.
Yeah.
You know, of these brutish, primitive, simple, sort of lives. And sort of whenever anything doesn't fit with that data, you know, like, Cro-Magnon had a 10% bigger brain than modern humans. How does that work? And they explain that away, but well, that's because of fight or flight responses. Hypervigilance, he had to have his brain going all the time because you never know when a tiger's going to jump out and bite you. Which, like any Indigenous person on the planet will tell you, no, we know where the tigers are. We always know where the tigers are. Relax. Nobody ever gets taken by a tiger. Only people in pith helmets get taken by a tiger. Like this isn't dropping Bear Grylls back in Paleolithic times, you know. You know, we have relationships with predators, you know, etc. So it's a lot more complex than that. So if you can imagine the complex ritual and ceremonial and just lived experience where, you know, there aren't these separate things like nature, economy, arts. These are all one thing, you know, and art is just part of your daily practice, so much so that it doesn't need a separate word. It certainly doesn't need to be separated out into just a few special elevated individuals who get to be the artists. It's like everybody does that, you know, and that's that distributed sort of way that they're trying to get back to with this blockchain by circumventing institutions and trust. Yeah, but it's a tricky thing. You've got all those gating functions that I was talking about and those phrases, those policing phrases. And we keep running into that one lately of everything we propose, you know, from Indigenous ways of being in governance or economies, trade, etc. You know, the first question comes, but does it scale? Yeah. Does it scale? Yeah. You know, because, you know, it's like we can't even consider, it's not on the table if it don't scale, because there has to be that foundational assumption of, well, it has to be able to grow infinitely. Yeah. Otherwise, it's of no use or value. Yeah. You know, and every item that you bring to the table, it must, you know, like under the current economic model, in order for anything to be priced, see, things just do have value, and we all understand that as humans. But to have price, there needs to be a little magic trick performed, where that item has to have two things. It has to have limitability and excludability. So there has to be a limited supply of it, even if that is, you know, has to be manufactured. You know, if something is an infinite resource, it has to be somehow limited, you know, so that there's a scarcity. And also you have to be able to exclude massive groups of people, you know, from that in order for anything to have price. And so in that way, that's how inequality is systemic. It's not a political thing. It's not coming from people's hearts because we're all these flawed racists deep down or something. It's about just being able to survive in an economic system that needs to exclude groups of people in order for anything to be priced, you know. And so basically in that way, all your inequality, your prejudice, everything else is really just a symptom of a pathological economic system. It's not the root cause of inequality. You know, inequality itself is just a symptom of a pathological growth-based economic system. And I think people are sick of it. And everywhere you see people, and this is what I wanted to talk about, was language, the way language changes. People are sick of the word sustainability now. And there's a big zeitgeist of people who are saying, no, regenerative. It can't just be sustainable, because that's rubbish. That's just sustaining the infinite growth model. It has to be regenerative. So people are coming up with regenerative economies, regenerative accounting methodologies, and all these kinds of things that are just amazing. So not just land-based stuff, because in the end, everything is land. And so you come back through that tether, you know, to that original layer that's been divided into this stack now of all these separate things. That's just one thing, and all comes back to land, all comes back to place. And your land changes your language, your landscape, the evolutionary dynamics of your changing landscape changes your language, which is beautiful. So I talked to one of these groups the other day, and one of their things was they used a word, instead of saying like-minded people, they said like-hearted.
Yeah, I use that.
Yeah, and I'd never heard that before, and I went, see how the language changes. And you know, you guys have this placeholder of like optimism 2.0, and I'm absolutely certain that as you continue, you know, under all these evolutionary pressures of the landscapes we're living in now, digitally and otherwise, that a word will emerge from that. And it won't be one person inventing it or designing it or coming up with an idea. It's going to come out collectively and demotically, you know, from a dynamic collective, which is really exciting. A dynamic collective only happens when you're in that space that we've been talking about, that sort of feeling for knowledge rather than just thinking. You know, you have to have that exchange going all the time this way. That's what generates that.
Yeah, I want to pick up on this because I think something that struck me so profoundly in many things, right, in reading your book is about the whole thing that, well, he said, boredom was weaponized and deployed to lobotomize a population. Like, I mean, that was just dramatic and powerful and so true. But this idea that true learning is a joy because it's an act of creation. And schools, a friend of mine who's here was the misbehaving radical, but is this unbelievable, was dyslexic, but unbelievably intelligent on so many levels, just could not sit and be controlled, you know? So I think our schooling system, and I can't say education because it's not educating, it's just installing programming that is limiting and disconnecting, you know, the wholeness of the being, you know, this sort of from creation, from spirit, from all aspects, is sit and be controlled and read and listen and write. You know, it's so like that. So if we don't shift back to a more interconnected way of being, I think all the things you talk about with policies and procedures, and we'll take your Indigenous knowledge and we'll put it into systems and practices, but we won't actually live it. It'll just be layers on top of nothing, you know? So
it's that layers on top of nothing. I've got to flag that. That's beautiful. What a perfect phrase to describe the economic system that's on top of us at the moment. And I wouldn't mind getting back to that and the mapping thing, because it's central.
Yeah, because I think unless we stop, and it's like you said, we had this year where we could stop, but we're not used to stopping, and it's been really hard for a lot of people to just breathe into, oh, okay, can I just hang here? I know there were times when I found myself in this existential kind of panic that I'm not delivering, which, you know, I'm really aware that that's not necessary. I catch it and I go, bloody hell, I'm still hooked in, you know?
Yeah.
So how can we got this gift in a way, which is also incredibly destructive, but the creation process is, or transformation process is, kind of, it throws out things.
Mm.
What have you been doing? I mean, how do you hold all of that and live a job?
Well, that's two different questions. It's, yeah, holding all of that is one thing, but holding all of that and both of us living jobs when the universities are still closed and we've been on lockdown in this house with 2 babies all year. Yeah, it isn't possible. Basically, you just fall behind and behind and behind in your job until you know that, oh man, yeah, I'm probably not going to be able to keep this job. Down the track, I'm sure there's a list being made somewhere of all the things that I've missed out. And I don't know, we're constantly failing to meet deadlines and struggling and then arguing over whose deadline is more important, who's done more and who's done less, and who's had more sleep and who's had less sleep, when basically we're both working 18, 20 hours a day, just in 3-minute bursts back and forth between our work and the children, and then trying to sleep just as they're waking up. Yeah, so you just don't. But everybody's feeling that pressure of, this is impossible. This is an impossible economic system. Now, you talked before about, when you were talking about knowledge, you used the word membrane, this idea of a membrane. So any complex dynamic system, including a knowledge system, it does have a membrane around it. And that's a semi-permeable membrane. So semi-permeable membrane, that means that there are some protocols in that membrane that decides what comes in and what goes out, because you need to have exchange with other systems. But you also want to make sure that nothing's going to get in that's going to crash that system. It's like a firewall, you know? Yeah, the thing is, when you said before, you referenced that idea of education, that's just another one of those symptoms, you know, of this economic system. And that's about setting some very strict protocols around, you know, in that membrane, to limit anything that would come in that would challenge that system. And that system was basically about changing the map. And the map, you know, that is our consciousness, our spatial relation, you know, in place with all the other human and non-human entities we're related to. That's our map of consciousness. That's our map of being as human beings. And 100 years ago, most of the people in the world were still living in profound relation to the landscape. It's only been in the last 100 years people were removed from that. And that was because of our financial system. And that the necessary thing to do first for that financial system was to turn land into capital. And so they did that by putting another map over the top of our maps. So they put a map in there, and they basically made this grid. And so they made these enclosures, these sort of almost non-permeable membranes. They made enclosures, parcels of land, so that every single piece of land on the planet, and even water, is now mapped and owned. It's spoken for, and people's access to that is restricted. And the main thing is that was turned into capital. So that meant that that land you could borrow against that. That could be mortgaged. And mort, death, I think, is an appropriate thing to put in there, you know, because the idea that could be leveraged for loans, and then you could have all your derivatives on top of that, multiple layers into infinity. That enabled this magical infinite growth economic system that we're now mired in, you know. And it should be recognized that system was first trialed on Indigenous peoples. So that legal mechanism was developed in order to steal lands from Indigenous people when they've been given a reservation or had a treaty, you know, land under a treaty. They invented that financial mechanism to be able to steal that land from people by foreclosing on loans. And then that extended to everybody else. And, you know, then we had 2008. So you see where that goes, and everybody's starting to see where it goes and starting to understand that everything that has been done and is being done to Indigenous people, we're like the guinea pigs, and that will also happen to you. And I think people are starting to go, no, okay, we don't want this, we want something else. But it's very tricky because we're in these bubbles now. We're in these membranes where somebody else has designed the protocols by which that is permeable. Someone else has controlled the gating functions about what gets in and what goes out. But people are finding amazingly creative ways. And I guess that's what gives me Optimism 2.0, is just the amazing work that's being done everywhere, like this zeitgeist of people with very different ideologies. So you've got extreme left libertarians and extreme right libertarians all sitting together at a table and not ridiculing each other and not policing each other's language or anything else, but actually coming up with amazing solutions and new language like, you know, regenerative economics and, you know, regenerative land use practices, regenerative production, all these kinds of things. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
There are, there's exciting things going on.
I mean, I find not exciting that we've come to the end of an hour. That's not exciting at all.
Hey.
How did that happen? And there's just too much more to explore. I feel we're just kind of getting somewhere. I want to share two things, and then we'll need to sort of start to come to a close, because that's what we invited you to and promised to everyone. But we'll invite everybody up in a minute. What's that?
I said, I don't care what the time is.
You don't care? Okay, well, we'll keep moving. I loved this idea, which at the end of when we talk about, and I know you said use your own words and all of that, but this idea of how the hand holds the whole of creation, in a sense, you know, that, and I'm going to copy because I don't have my own yet at all, but I love this idea that, you know, the little finger represents the child, which is about the relationships, and that it learns and knows everything through relationships. And then the mother, because they're together, they're the foundation of the whole of life. And she's the story, she has a story mind. So this is the anyway, it's a relationship. And the story mind, she tells stories to teach everything to the child. So this connectedness of the whole of life here. And then the man, who's the dreaming mind, right? So he's all about metaphor and, you know, all of the story of from going out into the world. And then there's kinship, is that right?
Ancestor mind.
Ancestor mind. So this is kinship mind.
Yeah.
Ancestor mind. So, and this is what, when I was listening about your giving birth, Megan, it's like in that moment to ancestor mind, which brings you information, but not only data information, like cellular knowingness, if you can be connected to that beyond what you can know intellectually, and it can land there as well. And then this thumb is I can't remember the big
pattern.
What is it?
Pattern.
Yeah, so the big mind, the one that sees the interconnected patterness, and this whole thing, life is here. I love that. You know, because it's an intellectual concept, but kinesthetically anchored, and it makes sense. And then you put these together. I would encourage everyone to look that and go through the feeling experience of it, because we're sitting here talking about concepts, but what you're offering is a window into way more than concepts. It's to being,
Yeah.
With this one, I was trying to eliminate this this idea of having lists. 10 things you can do to save the planet, like 5 qualities for succeeding in business, 7 habits of effective people, or whatever, all those things. So I started out sort of making something that would look like that, and then obliterated it into this. Yeah, that was the idea of that. It was more to sort of steer people away from having to have, lists and rubrics and, almost like these KPIs for self-actualization, which, even our spiritual development has to, come under these things now as if we're at work.
Yeah.
I just, Carolyn and Tyson, a lot of people join us for the hour. There are people in Denver and other places where they're going to sleep at night. So Carolyn, I just wonder if we can just thank everyone who's joined us and then keep talking. There's no obligation to stop, and we can bring people in so we have that greater sense of community. But Carolyn, I want to just thank our friends who've joined us who need to leave now, whether they're in a different time zone or if they're in Melbourne and exercising their newfound freedom.
Yeah, indeed, indeed. And maybe we can bring everyone up on to the screen into the visual community, because it's what we normally do about now. Thank you everyone so much, and really we're just starting to scratch the surface of it's more than conversation. It's like meandering and exploring. I don't know, it's just enjoyable and deep and light filled. So
it's been brilliant. I mean, I just honestly, Tyson and Megan, if you could see the conversation going on in the sideboard, you have thrilled people. And Caroline, you're solidified. People just adore that as well. So fantastic. So, but as I said, we're letting people in now and just keep the conversation going, because there's a lot of people saying, just keep going.
We'll go as long as we can. But I mean, basically, you can see the big problem with this idea of having a book and an author, and they're like, Tyson said this, you know what I mean, and we're going to talk to Tyson, but that book isn't me. And it's I mean, I hope you sort of see that at least half that book is me. You know what I mean? That these any knowledge I have is sitting in relation, with other things, and this is the biggest relation that I have.
Some cultures keep asking, why are we here? It's easy. This is why we're here. We look after things on the earth and in the sky and in the places in between. And I think I heard something yesterday. As a woman called Elizabeth Lesser. I don't know if Tyson, and she's written a new book called Cassandra Speaks. It's not out yet. So Elizabeth Lesser.
Cassandra myth, yeah. And
she says, and it's the fact that Cassandra speaks. When women tell stories, the story changes. It's like the multiplicity of storytelling, not the one story that we inherited. But one of the things that she explained in that, which I really love and I think speaks to that thing, we're here to take care. She said this whole movement of, we're all under this fight and flight, the sympathetic nervous system is, and that's really true. But she said, when you look at the stories, the women's stories, respond in fight and flight. They respond with tend and befriend.
Hey, men used to tend and befriend too, and it might be time for us to get back to that product. But I really like that what's in the book was just a seed, and now the book is something more than a book. It's yarns all around the world. Lots of people who've taken it further than I could even imagine. With my tiny mind. People are just doing amazing things with it, and have gone beyond it, just far beyond it. And Yeah.
That help? It's pretty sort of open question that really provides a canvas.
Okay, yeah. So, I mean, and the question, my research question is open as well, because we don't know. And so, you know, really because blockchain is a new way of organising, it's really about kind of seeing how different, you know, there's different parts of blockchain that you know, are automated processes, for example. So, you know, like smart contracts and so forth. And it's about kind of seeing whether or not there are alignments. It's not just about kind of bringing blockchain, you know, like taking, say, Indigenous enterprises and putting them on a blockchain. It's about looking at the way that Indigenous knowledges and Indigenous governance kind of functions, you know, like in relation to place, in relation to time, in relation to flux. And so, you know, I mean, I don't want to sort of assert my own, you know, ideas or projections of what the findings might be, because at this point, so I'll be conducting case studies. And so, you know, and that will be working with Indigenous communities to, you know, see how they, you know, to sort of observe how they interact with, you know, a particular blockchain application, and what, you know, what emerges really around, you know, collective decision-making processes. You know, they might decide that, you know, this is completely, we really don't like this, or you know, yeah, wow, this is amazing. This could potentially be a way for us to sort of, you know, find new ways to bring, you know, for valuing Indigenous knowledge, you know, and for sort of keeping or sort of mapping the transactions of Indigenous knowledge, you know, which to this up to this point, you know, well, it's, you know, it's either not being valued, or there's been an extractive sort of, you know, kind of appropriation of Indigenous knowledge, that, you know, often the you know, the proceeds may not go back to Indigenous communities. So at this point in the research, you know, I'm still at a point where I'm you know, I'm yet to go out and start conducting case studies.
Well, if we can help you, Megan, we'd love to. We did a brilliant event recently with the University of New England where, you know, there were people there talking about farmers using blockchain,
Right.
so that the consumer knows that
Yes.
the animal or the beast came from this farm and was this type of animal. And so if we can bring those relationships to bear to help you in your research, you've got a very loving audience here who wants to help.
Wow, thank you. Sounds amazing. There's a project actually taking place at RMIT at the moment that's you know, doing a similar thing, you know, creating an MVP, like a blockchain proof of concept, to be used in, that could be used in Indigenous, you know, in the Indigenous food market. Yeah. So kind of bringing trust into the, you know, into the supply chain essentially.
There's a Professor Jones at University of Melbourne, and someone sent me her 1996 paper the other day, and she said, trust is an optimistic belief that the other person will comply with the promises they've made to you. Well, that's now one of my two favorite phrases. So blockchain helps deliver that.
Yeah, it's trying to find a digital solution for pretty much, it's the same with everything. It's finding a digital solution to what the land used to provide for everybody, because, you know, forever the law has been in the land. The law is in the land, and if you're of the land, and then you're under that law, and that is what limits you. And that's what, prevents the tragedy of the commons from occurring and sort of one person ruining everything. Like a bull in a china shop, and then everybody having to follow suit or fall behind, And so I guess that blockchain is hoping to have a digital solution to circumvent the need for trust in the first place. But I believe the land and the landscape already offers that affordance, and it's right there under your feet and ready for you to plug into and upload whenever you're ready. Just any time now. Nice place to end it, I think. That's beautiful.
Thank you so much, both. It's been absolute, just rich and, membrane stretching.
Yeah.
Thanks to everyone else who's here, all our regular folks.
It's so nice to see you all. Thank you. Thank you for having us.